Hello, everyone. I am the pedantic skeptic, and I am here to criticize people's arguments and grammar so that you have the best way of assessing information and making your own informed decisions. Today, we're going to do part 2 of my assessment and response to Answers in Genesis. They have a weekly news video type thing where they talk about current events, news articles, things like that from their perspective, and so we're going to get into it. Let's do this.
Should expect, and it's probably only going to be on there.
And plus, there's no understanding or recognition that children are sinful, just like every.
Okay, this idea of sinfulness and being sinful, children are generally innocent because they don't have the same grasp of the consequences of their actions or even what they're enacting. Now, I'm sure we can take our guesses what they mean by sinful and sin, but these are children we're talking about. It's absolutely disgusting to say that children have some predetermined, innate badness to them.
Everyone is
And yet
sinful.
you go back
We have
to
a sinful
Genesis
heart.
8:21.
We're not neutral.
Yeah. Genesis 8:21 says the intent of man's heart is evil even from their youth.
Have you ever wondered what happens when you pour salt into a cabbage? The end remedy not only helps you balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, Romans 3:23.
And if we don't understand that and then understand what the Bible says about how to train children and how to deal with that, then that's what we end up with. Generation.
Well, I'm just curious because they're talking about pornography and they're talking about children who are acting out different sexual acts on each other and effectively sexually assaulting one another. And what I'm curious about is how many of them had those particular desires, urges, or inklings as children. Because when I was a child, I don't know, I must have been about 12 when I really began to become the limited in a sexual scope type of person that I would eventually become. But, aside from some of those little crushes on people that kids get just because that's what they pick up from adults is a thing to do, I don't think I ever had a desire to act out anything sexual on another person, especially not another person who wasn't consenting. So I don't know about them, the people at Answers in Genesis, but thinking that kids are in general inclined to sexually assault one another it needs some sort of evidential backing.
That rebel against him. Think about what happened before the flood. Everyone had rebelled except Noah and his family. That's where we're heading if we keep going the way we are.
I doubt it. Society has actually become safer in the last century. You're far less likely to be the victim of a violent crime now than you were 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Well, and they want to fix it too. They talk about, there's these behavioral therapy models, that they're going to try to help the kids change their behavior. But just changing the outside and changing what they do isn't any change at all, right? It has to come from a heart change.
So there is a theory in therapy that behaviors and cognition are linked, and you can influence one to enact change in the other. And it's not simply a matter of making a child not do something. It's a matter of making a child understand why they should not do action X or action Y, and rationalizing with that child Okay, the reason we don't do Action X and Action Y is because it's harmful, and we don't want to be harmful. And the way society functions is when people are not doing harmful things to one another. Now, again, I ask, what percentage of children, why don't we just talk about preteen children, 12 and younger, are actually actively planning or thinking about any kind of sexual advances towards other people their age without consent being involved.
And a mind change, and realize that this is a sin problem, not just a behavior problem.
The change that will be the only change that's needed for them is to understand and believe God's word and to respond to the gospel.
Right, repent of this stuff.
Yeah.
Turn to the Lord.
And that's why we need to be training up our children, as the scripture says, to train them up in the things of the Lord.
When we have the women's conference this year, Answers for Women, April 5th and 6th, we're going to be talking about this very topic of pornography and how it affects not just adults, but youth as well. And so I encourage you to check out more about that at answersforwomen.org.
Now, I think that pornography, when used correctly, is perfectly fine. Like basically anything else, you can use pornography in a bad way. I don't think porn is inherently problematic. I think that it is possible to become addicted to watching porn. I think it is possible to spend too much time watching porn. I think it is possible if you are watching porn that you pay for, which we're not going to get into here whether it's the most ethical thing to pay for porn because, there's the argument that, these are people that need to make an honest living, and one of the things that you can do is, support them by paying them. That's great. That's beyond the scope of this. But it's possible to spend too much money on porn. It's possible to spend too much money on houseplants. It's possible to spend too much money on a number of different things. Again, it's not a porn-specific issue, and it's not an argument to do away with porn. It's an argument to do away with porn that is accessible to children, or that depicts children, or that has been made by unethical producers, or has been made where the models aren't getting compensated, things like that.
We'll put the information up there.
So, I don't know, Bodie, someone here, I don't know if they were complaining or not, but because I used a pun, they seem to think I was copying you or something.
All right.
Because Bodie is usually the pun king on Answers News.
We have people from South Africa on here, so from all over the world.
Good.
All right, Irish lawmakers vote to allow abortion, part of landmark liberal shift. So several months ago, we saw that the voters there repealed in Ireland a constitutional ban on abortion. So it was actually part of their constitution in Ireland.
Oh, just a quick reminder. This was from the end of 2018. So for everybody who's looking at this picture and saying, but the coronavirus, this was pre-COVID.
And now the lawmakers have basically passed a bill that says that every citizen, basically, of Ireland, every woman citizen, have a free and legal
Every assigned female at birth citizen, you mean?
Abortion in the country. So it's now become official.
It shows that the Constitution really is irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to put it that way.
Well, it really comes down to people's worldview. Their worldview has changed, and so therefore throughout the Constitution and what it said. And that's what we've got to understand. It's happening in America as well. It doesn't matter what the Founding Fathers meant by what's in the Constitution. It's going to be interpreted by people who have particular worldviews, and if they have an anti-Christian worldview, they will reinterpret it.
I love how he says anti-Christian when there are Christians who are fine with abortion. But besides that, most people who are not Christian are not anti-Christian. And the majority of the people who are anti-Christian specifically, if we wanted to define anti-Christian being opposed to Christians, or perhaps opposed to the ideas of Christianity or the teachings, I don't want to say that he's starting his prosecution narrative here, or persecution narrative, but I think that there's a difference between I don't hold this view and I oppose this view. an example I always use is I don't own a ferret, so I'm a non-ferret owner, but I'm not necessarily opposed to ferrets or ferret owners just because I don't happen to own a ferret. I actually know people who have ferrets, but that's a little bit irrelevant right now.
Well, here's the thing. From a big picture, you start with the Bible. God is the ultimate lawgiver. We have a basis for law when you start with God and His Word. But as soon as you
Do you have any evidence for this?
reject God and His Word, law can be anything you want it to be. You can change it at any moment, at any time, for any situation, and that's the culture we're starting to live in. And we're seeing it in Ireland here.
And it's only
So this is a hallmark of progression, because we are humans, we are fallible, we don't have the best foresight or hindsight, and we are very bad at actually discerning what is beneficial to the greater good. Now, I did go through in part one the fact that there doesn't seem to be too much of a correlation between a country being religious in any sense, particularly the Christian sense, and rates of crimes and things like that being lower. It seems that it's all over the map. The majority of sex offenders identify as Christian, at least in the United States, and it doesn't seem that the Bible is a very good guiding book for how we're supposed to act. Now, laws are in place to protect us from ourselves and from each other. And when we first come up with laws, we come up with them because we suspect that they are going to be beneficial to serving the goal of improving human life and the quality of life for everybody. And so, we have the obvious, it's against the law to kill somebody, you know, and we, will probably progress to the point where things like euthanasia aren't the same thing as, going into a parking lot and stabbing somebody to death. If somebody is seriously ill and they're in a lot of pain and suffering and there's no prospect for them to get better, it's a different matter about whether or not we should end their suffering and, kill them. It wouldn't be the same as murdering somebody. And, hi, Riley. Physician-assisted suicide has become legal in many areas because we're starting to realize now that, people do have the ability to make these sorts of decisions for themselves, and we're not, trying to prolong people's suffering. So, laws are not always good, but the reason that laws change is because we start to get data from the current set of laws that we have, and we see where the deficits are, and then we adjust. It's this idea of the negative feedback loop again. We look at things, we have a goal in mind, and when we don't know what to do, we do what we think is best, and then we reassess. And if what we've done hasn't been productive, we do something new, we do something different.
and right now, at least, it's legal up until the 12th week for any reason of pregnancy, and in the case of a fatal fetal abnormality or serious risk to a woman's life or health. And so this is, that in essence is eugenics. If you're getting rid of children.
No. Eugenics has to do with identifying particular genes and particular genotypes that we deem better, and differentially allowing them to breed. Note here how when she's talking about the risk to the mother's health or fatal fetal abnormalities, they're not necessarily genetic, okay? Now, there are a number of genetic diseases that fetuses can have, or that people can develop through their lifetime, that should you have them, they will cause you to die at some point. And some of these fatal genetic diseases don't even allow you to be born. Some of them, like Tay-Sachs, for example, take a little bit longer to kill you. Some of them, like Huntington's disease, take even longer to kill you. But there are a number of genetic defects that occur that will result in death as their end result. Not all fetal abnormalities are caused by genetics. Sometimes fetal abnormalities can be caused by the mother having some pre-existing condition. It doesn't have anything to do with the genetics of the fetus. It may not necessarily have to do with the genetics of the mother. You can cause fetal abnormalities to occur with pollutants or things like that, and you don't always know if you've been exposed to a pollutant. So this isn't even a genetics issue at its core. This is an issue of what's going to happen should this pregnancy be allowed to continue. Are you going to have to go through the trauma of birthing a stillbirth or having a baby that's going to die in 24 hours? Are you going to be potentially killed by carrying on this pregnancy? And again, you don't necessarily have a genetic reason for this pregnancy being a risk to your health. And so she's using this buzzword eugenics because she's trying to make us alarmed. That's all it is. It's being alarmist.
Because they have some kind of defect. And what's interesting is I've studied eugenics a lot, and in Ireland, eugenics back in the late 1800s, early 1900s was pretty much didn't happen there. It happened a lot in other parts of Europe and in America, but didn't happen here because of what? The influence of the Catholic Church that kept.
All right, let's see here. So, eugenics is the set of beliefs that aim at improving the genetic quality of the human population. Now, here's the thing. This definition in and of itself isn't horrible. I'm not saying we should necessarily forcibly sterilize people. I'm not saying we should compel people to have abortions or anything like that. However, I do think that people should be making informed decisions about their reproduction. And if you are a significant carrier or at a significant risk of carrying harmful genetic disorders and spreading them, probably should look into ways of reducing the possibility of a child that you produce having that. And one way is just not to have children. Now, I'm not necessarily an antinatalist, but I do have a bunch of thoughts on whether or not people should reproduce in general. I think that we have a lot of people on this earth and we're having a hard time keeping up with just what we have. And I think people need to, basically think twice about reproducing. But we have genetic counselors and people who will help should you want to, produce children and you're worried you're going to spread some sort of genetic disease. What happens is you get screened for a number of genetic diseases first, and there are ways, where if you're, a man and a woman, you can have a whole bunch of fertilized eggs produced, and then you test each of the fertilized eggs for inheriting that disease, and you only implant the ones that don't have the genes for that disease anymore. Now, eugenics itself, wherein you're forcibly sterilizing people and things like that, I don't think is right. But I do think that we need to have a better view or a better set of knowledge out there on genetic disorders and problems. Now, I know that eugenics itself has been more subjective than that. They're not, when people practice eugenics, they're not really worried about things like Huntington's disease and multiple sclerosis. I think that that's genetically mediated, but I'm not entirely sure. Things like that. They're more focused on, oh, if you have blue eyes and blonde hair, then you're genetically superior. And there's no basis for that. Um, what I'm envisioning is using our knowledge of genetics to stop people from being born with crippling abnormalities. What this eugenics is focusing on is we deem this one group of people bad for some reason, and so we don't want them making babies. That's wrong. Yes. So let's just take a quick look here. So while ostensibly about improving genetic quality, eugenics is more about preserving the position of the dominant groups. Yeah. So this is why eugenics is such a problem. Things like genetic counseling and better teaching of genetics to our students is fine. So eugenics as it was. So here, actually, why don't we go to concerns over hereditary genes? Okay. Ah, nice. Okay. In the 19th century, based on a view of Lamarckism, which itself is the notion that an offspring can pass on to an organism can pass on to its offspring characteristics that it acquired. So it's this idea that if my dog, for some reason, were not spayed and we chopped off her tail, which we didn't, and then she had puppies, the puppies would be born tailless. It doesn't really work that way. Now I will, just to be pedantic here, say that there are some cases where this can happen because you can be exposed to a number of different um, agents that mutate your DNA, and if that gets into your gametes, then you do acquire a genetic change when you're born, when you're alive, that can be passed on to your offspring. Certain viruses can do this as well, and things like that. So it's not complete BS, but at its core, it's not scientifically sound. One of the things that you'll find is a lot of these atrocities against humanity that were committed during the earlier parts of our history are not necessarily backed by any kind of science. It was believed damage done to people by diseases can be inherited. Through eugenics, these diseases can be eradicated. It's not that simple. The belief was carried into the 20th century. The Carnegie Institute report explored 18 methods for removing defective genetic attributes. The 8th method was euthanasia. Jeez. A mental institution in Illinois fed its patients milk infected with tuberculosis, reasoning genetically fit individuals would be resistant. I mean, in a sense, that's correct because fitness is, from a biological sense, defined as your ability to produce offspring that are viable and fertile. And if you catch tuberculosis and you're not able to fight it off, which most people are able to have latent tuberculosis infections and not be affected by them. So there is a basis for some people being resistant to tuberculosis, but it has nothing to do with your mental state. It's a totally different part of your body that is responsible for your resistance to tuberculosis. There were portrayals of eugenic mercy killings in film, newspapers, and magazines. It's just ill-informed shit. I'm not supporting eugenics. I think that, again, getting people to be informed about what potentially bad genetic traits they could pass on to their offspring. And this is coming purely from we don't want you to produce a person who's going to suffer because they've inherited something terrible from you, rather than we think that you're a plague on society and you shouldn't be allowed to make babies because you're unfit. It's okay, do you really want to pass something on to another person who's then going to have to suffer for it? But this is not the way to do it. Alright, let's see. The intent of the contest was to educate the public about raising healthier children because you had a 10% infant mortality. Jesus. Well, here in Indiana, the contests were limited to white infants. Yeah, there's a lot of racism there. Here we go. Compulsory sterilization. So here's really where eugenics caused a lot of problems. Men were sterilized to treat their aggression to eliminate criminal behavior, while women were sterilized to control the results of their sexuality. That's born from purity culture, which, guess which religion is really good at pushing purity culture? So this is terrible stuff. Now, what's interesting here is Answers to Genesis talks about this didn't happen in areas where the Catholic Church had its influence. Now, that could be true. She could be correct there. But just remember, the United States has been becoming less and less religious over time. A lot of these horrible things like eugenics that occurred very early in our history. Earlier than now, I'm sure there are people today who support eugenics and think that eugenics is a good idea. Now, there is a similar push for genetic betterment of dogs. And again, it's motivated by this idea that you don't want to produce dogs that are going to have suffering as part of their life because they've inherited genes that are going to, make them unable to breathe when they run or something stupid like that. But eugenics in humans has caused a lot of problems. Now, eugenics today is not as prevalent. The world today is not as religious. I don't know if there's a correlation, or if there's a causative relationship there, but there's certainly a correlative relationship there. Actually, 1 minute. Let me just see something here. Coffee. Okay, so support for eugenics over time. Okay, let's see. One of the earliest advocates of eugenics was Alexander Graham Bell. Now, let's see. Was a Scottish-born inventor, scientist, and engineer. Let's see. Just a sec. Jesus. I'm not seeing much on his. Oh, okay. So Bell's connected. He noted that congenitally deaf parents were more likely to produce deaf children. Okay, good. Suggests couples who were deaf should not marry. Okay. Now, what I should say, he died of diabetes. There's not anything here on his religious beliefs. I'm not sure. Eugenics. Who else? How about David Sarjardin? He was an ichthyologist, so he studied fish. Blah blah blah. I'm a fish. Blah 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 blah. Let's see. Skepticism. Although a proponent was skeptical of certain other pseudoscientific claims. Let's see. There's not much about his religious beliefs either. Huh. Alright, so let's see here. Alright. Let's see. Eugenics is the advocacy of improving the human species by selectively mating people. No, I don't want that. It aims to reduce human suffering by breeding out disease, disabilities, and so-called undesirable characteristics. Again, that's not a terrible goal as long as, just a heads up. Well, let me first say, it's not a terrible goal when you're doing it solely with the intention of reducing suffering and having a good knowledge base. The problem is people had this idea that suffering was caused by being part of this group or that group rather than, all right, this terrible disease is going to cause you suffering. Or, all right, here's the thing with these ads. This is an advertisement for a concrete filler, which is made out of, hang on, microscopic glass particles, microscopic glass beads. I bought some of this yesterday because I'm going to do an experiment where I use it to perforate orchid seeds to see if that makes them germinate more quickly. And now the only ads I'm getting on my computer are for these things. And I find it ridiculous because I need a couple of teaspoons of this shit and I bought an entire quart. So what makes them think that I need more than a quart when I've bought a quart and I need a couple of teaspoons of this material? I just don't get it. And now it thinks I'm in the market for a new mattress. I really need to get my ADHD meds refilled, don't I? Okay. Eugenics was popular in America during the first half of the 20th century. Alright, so okay. Okay, let's see. So currently we have 70.6% of the let's see if we can find it over time. Why don't interactives maybe? Ooh. Okay. Relation to the United States over time. The decline of Christianity continues at rapid pace. Okay. So let's see. So the United States was far more religious back at the beginning of this eugenics movement than it is now. So I don't think that Christianity is what is stopping eugenics from happening.
Kept it at bay. But what's happened now? You got all this scandal in the Catholic Church, and so people no longer see the church or even God or the Bible as a source of authority.
And even though we see scandals in the secular world, they just dismiss that.
Okay, so real quick, they fail to demonstrate that I mean, sure, scandals in the Catholic Church may make people leave the Catholic Church. It doesn't say anything about what people are believing or their faith. People can still believe in a God without going to a church. People can still believe in a God even though they think that religious organizations are corrupt and things like that. I like her face. She looks like a frog. Ribbit. Alright.
Well, they just follow after it anyway.
Actually, Dr. Pert and I were just over in Ireland, and we had a tremendous conference, and a lot of pastors who came who said, now, because of what's happened in Ireland and just the bankruptcy of Catholicism, because of what happened there, that there's a church that's emerging, but it's in its infancy now to rebuild.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that these guys are not explicitly Catholic, but I'm glad that they're not a Christian group that is bashing Catholics. Now, I'm not pro-Catholic or pro-Catholic Church, but I also don't think that people who identify as Catholics should necessarily be treated poorly just because of the actions of the Church, and I think it's unfair for other Christian denominations to hate on the Catholic Church or Catholics in general just because they have disagreements. And a lot of apologist groups do this. There aren't a lot of Catholic apologists, it's mostly different Protestant groups, but I don't know exactly what denomination these people are.
In that sense.
You know, it just breaks my heart to see, the abortion, not just in Ireland now, but all over the place. There's a simple fact. Every growing baby in the womb is choosing to live.
Right.
They don't have the cognitive ability to make any choices or decisions.
They're an image bearer. They're made in the image of God, and they have a right.
And remember this, when they say, oh, because of abnormality, they can have an abortion, who decides what the abnormality is? Like, for instance, in Iceland, they have aborted every baby with Down syndrome. And, you know, who makes that decision? It's man trying to be his own God.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
You know, another thing it has.
Well, I don't think that in Ireland they're forcing people to abort Down syndrome fetuses. I think that some people carrying fetuses that have Down syndrome decide to abort for that reason, but that doesn't mean the same thing as, hey, if you have a fetus that has Down syndrome, you have to get rid of it. That's not what's happening.
As in here is healthcare providers are basically forced to refer someone to someone who will perform the abortion.
They can't conscientiously object.
Yeah, you can't even object to it.
Okay. So, real quick, if you are working in the healthcare field, you have to make people aware of all of their options. It's only the ethical thing to do. You're not making the abortion happen by telling somebody, if you wish to get an abortion, you can go here or there. You know, you're just simply giving them that option as one option of many so that they can make their own decisions.
Yeah.
How sad is that?
And even the people that are for abortion are saying, well, this doesn't go far enough. They said it should be for any reason at any time, basically during the pregnancy. There shouldn't be any limit.
Yes. The reason for this is because we can't be partial to what is a good reason and what is a bad reason to have an abortion. Again, it's not the same thing as somebody saying you have to get an abortion. It's, I can't make the decision for you as to what you do with your body, because your body is yours and you have the right to make decisions based on your views and what's going on. And if you are a person who decides, you know, hey, if I find out that this fetus I'm carrying is going to have X, Y, or Z condition, feature, whatever, I don't want to have this baby, that is for you to decide. And we can't start dictating what is a good reason and what is a bad reason to have an abortion, because it's not our decision to make. It's the person who is pregnant, and that's the only person who really should be concerned or be making this decision.
It's no waiting period. It's no nothing. Again, it's never enough until it's total acceptance and promotion of it.
And you know, we have a number of young people in the audience, a number of young people watching. I just want to make the point. It doesn't matter whether it's the abortion issue, the LGBT issues, gay marriage issue, or whatever it is, the gender issue that's going on right now. They're all the same issue. When you don't have an absolute authority, then who decides right and wrong?
Right.
Who decides good and bad? When you don't have an absolute authority, anything goes. In fact, there are no lines.
Right.
Right?
How do you decide?
Well, you haven't demonstrated that there is a reason to have a line in the first place. I agree that there are certain things that should never be acceptable, but I draw the line at where it causes harm to another human being, and specifically a sentient human being who is living their own life. I think that, you know, they are being a little bit too literalist of the Bible, and they're not thinking critically about, you know, the human condition. They're focused mostly on what an ancient book says, or what their interpretation of what an ancient book says.
Right.
And how do you decide right and wrong?
Yeah,
I mean, this is child sacrifice, and
it's not child sacrifice.
Essentially, Ireland just passed a law to declare war on their own children.
Yep. It's people sacrificing children to the god of sex.
Many other countries have already done it.
Yeah,
including our own.
exactly.
Hey, Bodie, someone said here they want you to use at least 3 puns today.
3 puns.
Yeah, can you use 3 puns?
All right, well, this next one comes from Fox News. That's Foxy.
All right, okay.
All right. I think that's a good stopping point for part 2. So we'll have a part 3 released soon, and I'm really hoping they get to the prehistoric creature article soon, because that's really what I watched and responded to this video for. So, hang on. Come here, Rye. Come on. Come up here. Riley. Come on. Good girl. Hi. Hi, big girl. Hi, honey. I know. Aw. I gotta make this bed soon. Yeah. Big girl. I love the dog. All right. You want to say goodbye to the audience? Bye-bye. La 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 la. Good golden doodle. I love dogs. What? Say hello. Hello. All right. Well, thank you for watching. I've been Pedantic, a romantic and adjacent to the Atlantic. And have a good one.